All right, it's Tuesday. That means the playoff committee does their little song and dance tonight on ESPN when they release their next version of their college football rankings. I'm fixing to show you mine. This isn't a prediction of what the committee will do. I obviously value different things that the committee does, specifically when it comes to Notre Dame. To me, games that are played actually matter. Head-to-head results actually matter, especially when two teams have the same record. But anyway, so I'm going to show you my playoff bracket, what it would look like based on how I have things shaping up. Some of it is pretty easy, and I think we'll agree on a lot of it. Despite what's going on with a couple of teams and a couple of rankings, I think the committee's outside of that has done mostly a pretty good job. There's not a whole lot to disagree with. There might be some seeding disagreements, like, in other words, the committee has a team 6, you think they should be 5, something like that. But when it comes to just who's getting into the playoffs, it's mostly most people agree on the majority of the teams. But anyway, shout out to Sleeper for sponsoring today's video. Make sure you download the Sleeper app. You'll be glad you did. It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. You can have yourself a lot of fun, or a lot more fun, watching these games this weekend by playing along on the Sleeper app. You just pick more or less on player stats. You don't even pick winners or losers of games. It's just more or less on player stats. You can win up to 1,000 times your money. Use promo code LOU, LOU, and download the Sleeper app today. The link is in the description down below. All right, here we go. Here's my playoff bracket. As of today, the end of week 13, heading into week 14. Of course, rivalry week coming up. So opportunities for some of these teams to lose and play themselves out of the playoffs, obviously. Opportunities for some teams who maybe are on the bubble, not quite in the playoff bracket right now, to earn their way in. And some opportunity for some moving up and down within the rankings. So let's kind of start with what I have a feeling that the majority of the people will generally agree on. Again, maybe not exactly where they're ranked, but generally, yeah, that's a good spot for that team. They're definitely going to be in the playoffs. You start with number 1, Ohio State. They play Michigan this coming week. I know that they've lost to Michigan 4 years in a row, and for all I know, they'll lose again. All right. And so for the sake of argument, I'll even grant you that maybe they lose. Well, what would that mean in terms of the playoffs? Well, it would mean Ohio State would drop down, but not out of the playoff ranking. And it would likely mean that Michigan would move into the playoff rankings. You got to remember, Michigan only has 1 conference loss and 2 losses total. And one of those losses is to another playoff team in this Oklahoma. If Michigan beats Ohio State and they're 10-2, they're going to have to find a spot somewhere in these rankings to put Michigan. So that would bump somebody out. It wouldn't bump Ohio State out, though. So even if you disagree with Ohio State at 1, I think we all agree at a minimum they're getting into the playoffs. At number 2, I've got Texas A&M. I think the winner of the SEC championship game, if it's Texas A&M, will definitely have the 2 seed. I don't think there's any possibility of them taking the 1 seed. You're going to have Ohio State and Indiana, of course, playing in the Big Ten championship game, most likely, barring something weird this weekend. So even if Texas A&M beats Texas this coming weekend and then beats whoever it is they beat in the SEC championship game, most likely Alabama or Georgia, I think 2 is as high as they could go. But again, even if you think I'm wrong about Texas A&M beating Texas this weekend, they're still going to be in the playoffs. They're undefeated. They're 11-0. So even if they lose to Texas, that'll put them at 12-1. They then won't be in the SEC championship game, so they won't even have a chance for a second loss. So they'd be 11-1. They'd be in the playoffs somewhere, right? I think we all agree on that. The primary question around Texas A&M right now is, what happens to Texas if Texas beats them? How far up does Texas go? They've got 3 losses. One of them is to a terrible team, Florida. They have a second loss that's a blowout to Georgia. And then they have the close loss to Ohio State. Their best win is Oklahoma, so it's a pretty good win. But I don't know if a win over Oklahoma and Texas A&M would be enough to offset 3 losses when one of them's to a bad Florida team and another one is a blowout. I don't think there's much chance of Texas getting in regardless of what happens with the A&M game. I do think A&M is getting in the playoffs no matter what. I've got them at 2. I've got Indiana at 3. They could be the 1 seed if they win the Big Ten. Right now, I'm going with Ohio State to win the Big Ten, which is why I have them seeded this way. But again, Indiana's a team that's 11-0. They're a massive favorite over, I think, Purdue this coming weekend, one of the worst teams on the planet. They're going to win that game. And then whether they win or lose the Big Ten championship game, again, I think we all agree they will be in the playoffs. If you disagree, there would be a matter of seeding. But I've got them at 3. And then I've got Texas Tech at 4. Now, this is a tricky one. This one's split 50-50, I think, from the people that I've talked to anyway, callers on the show, reading comments, things like that. I still value conference championship wins. Now, there's a debate to be had about how much longer we're even going to have conference championship games. And if we get to the point where we don't have conference championship games, then I'll look at things differently. But as long as we're playing conference championship games, I value the winner of those games. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, I'm automatically going to have 4 conference winners in my top 4. You can see that I don't. I've got a Big Ten team that didn't win the conference in the top 4. What I'm getting at here is the argument between sort of Texas Tech, Georgia, and Oregon primarily. All one-loss teams, all pretty good teams. Only one of those teams is even playing for a conference championship, most likely, that being Texas Tech. There's a possibility Georgia plays for the SEC championship game if Alabama or Texas A&M lose this weekend. But for the purposes of what I have showing here, this is assuming Texas Tech wins the Big 12 title game, most likely in a rematch against BYU. And this assumes Georgia doesn't even make the SEC championship game, because I think Alabama and Texas A&M will win this weekend. If that happens, Texas Tech, the combination of Texas Tech being 12-1 overall with a Big 12 championship, with 2 wins over BYU, another win over Utah, a highly ranked team, that would be enough for me to move them ahead of a Georgia team who has 2 losses, so more losses than Texas Tech, didn't earn their right to play in their conference championship game, whereas Texas Tech did. And in this scenario, Texas Tech is winning that conference championship game. So that would be enough for me to reward Texas Tech with a first-round bye and a 4 seed overall. There is a lot of disagreement on that, depending on who you talk to. They don't think, a lot of people don't think the Big 12 champion will get into the top 4. I think if it's Texas Tech, I think they would deserve it. I wouldn't think it was some sort of egregious error if the committee put Georgia at 4 or Oregon at 4, one of these other sort of highly ranked one-loss teams that didn't play in a conference championship game. But again, this is my ranking, not a prediction of what the committee will do. I still value the conference championship. I've got Texas Tech at the 4 seed. And then that leaves Georgia with the 5. The teams I considered here at 5 were Georgia, Oregon, and Ole Miss. Well, Georgia beat Ole Miss head-to-head. They have the same record, but Georgia beat them head-to-head. In terms of Georgia and Oregon, I think Georgia's just got a better resume overall than Oregon. Doesn't mean I think Georgia's better than Oregon necessarily. It's just resume-based. You know, they've got a win against a ranked Tennessee team, a win against a ranked Ole Miss team. They beat everybody else they played with the exception of Alabama. Their only loss came to Alabama at home by 3. Oregon's only loss was at home by, I think, was it 10? They lost to Oregon. So I would have Georgia ahead of Oregon and Ole Miss for those reasons. You can see I've got Oregon there at 6. Oregon, Ole Miss, same record. How am I differentiating there? Same thing, kind of, resume. Oregon's going to end the season, I think, with 2 pretty good wins. They beat Southern Cal this past weekend. They play Washington on the road this coming weekend, and Washington's not a bad team. They're 8-3 in the Big Ten. That's pretty good. They're not a doormat. They're not Purdue. You know, they're not Mississippi State. I mean, they're a legitimate team. Are they a playoff contender? No. Are they a Big Ten contender? No. But it's what I would consider quality competition in the Big Ten. Washington's a good team. They got a good coach. They got a good quarterback. And if Oregon ends the season with wins at home against Southern Cal, a ranked team, and on the road at Washington, a ranked team, I would give them the nod over Ole Miss, who is finishing the season in the Egg Bowl against a really bad Mississippi State school. So that's why I have Oregon there with the 6 seed and Ole Miss with the 7 seed. Oregon with the 6, Ole Miss with the 7. 8 and 9, I've got Oklahoma and Bama. This is easy here, right? Same record. They played. I give Oklahoma the 8. And that's important there because that's the cutoff for hosting the home playoff game in the first round. The 8 seed, in this case, Oregon, gets a home game. The 9 seed, in this case, Alabama, gets a road game. I know people are some people have an issue with rematches or whatever. That's something that as college football fans, we're going to have to kind of get over. I think you should seed the teams the way you think they deserve to be seeded without giving any consideration at all to, well, this is a rematch, so let's move this team somewhere else so it's not a rematch. Because of the 12-team playoff conference championship game, expanded conferences, which means you're more likely to play a team in your own conference in the regular season, plus conference championship games, which present the opportunity for a rematch, plus an expanded playoff to 12 teams, we're gonna see a lot more rematches in college football than maybe we're used to seeing over the last 100 years when you had smaller conferences with divisions, a 4-team playoff, or before that, no playoff at all. So the opportunity for rematches was just very low. So it was very rare that you saw one. Now, because we have expanded conferences in a 12-team playoff, you're going to start to see a lot of rematches. I don't think you should move teams around specifically to avoid a rematch. If you think Oklahoma should be the 8 and you think Alabama should be the 9, then I think you should seed them 8 and 9, even though we saw that game a few weeks ago. Oklahoma, of course, beat Alabama on the road in Tuscaloosa. With my playoff bracket here, I would have Alabama traveling to Norman to play Oklahoma. I've got them at the 8 and the 9. With the 10 seed, I've got BYU. Now, here's what do I think about BYU? I don't think they're one of the best 12 teams in the country, but that's purely opinion. If they go the entire season 11-1, and their only loss is to Texas Tech, who everybody agrees is a pretty good team, they're in everybody's top 5. They're 11-1, and that's their only loss. And then they make their conference championship game. Number one, I don't think you can punish a team out of the playoffs for losing their conference championship game. I think if that starts happening, the conference championship games will go away. In other words, if you've got BYU in the top 10 before the conference championship game, which I do, assuming they win this week, which I think they will. If you've got BYU inside the top 10 before the conference championship game, and they lose their conference championship game, I can't then bump them out of the playoffs because they lost a 13th game that the majority of teams aren't playing. You would be rewarding, let's say, Vandy, and I'm going to get to them in a minute and why I don't have them in. Let's assume Vandy goes 10-2, beats Tennessee this weekend, but doesn't make it into the 12-team playoff. Would it be fair to reward Vandy for a BYU loss in a 13th game that Vandy wasn't good enough to make it to in their own league by moving Vandy into the playoff and moving BYU out? I just don't think that's right to do. I still enjoy the conference championship games. I told you when we talked about Texas Tech, I still value conference championships. And while I'm not an idiot, and I realize that there could be a time in the not too distant future where the conference championships go away, as long as we are having conference championship games, I just sort of feel the way I feel about them. So I do think BYU, if they make the Big 12 conference championship game, will lose for a second time to Texas Tech. I can't bump them out of my playoffs for that loss and then reward a team that did not play in their conference championship game, whether it be Vandy, Notre Dame, Miami, Utah, all teams who are likely to be 10-2 at the end of the year. So that's why I've got BYU there at the 10. Then at the 11, I've got North Texas. It gets difficult here really when you get to 10, 11, and 12. I have a feeling that 1 through 10 is going to be pretty, or really 1 through 9. 1 through 9, I think most people are going to agree on it, at least that they're making the playoff. Again, you could disagree with a lot of the seeding, but my 1 through 9, Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Georgia, Bama, Oklahoma, Oregon, Ole Miss. I think most people agree those teams are making the playoffs. So that leaves you with 3 spots, 10, 11, and 12. Well, 2 of those spots have to go to conference champions. I've got North Texas winning the American, most likely over Tulane. And if that happens, I think they will be the highest ranked group of 5 team in that final committee ranking. I have them as the highest ranked in mine. The other contenders would be James Madison at most likely 12-1. James Madison only has 1 loss. They're likely to win their conference championship game against an unranked team, which I don't think would be enough of a boost to them to move them ahead of the winner of the American. James Madison's in the Sun Belt. I think I said American. James Madison is the Sun Belt. North Texas, Tulane, Memphis, South Florida. Those are your American teams. It's considered a tougher conference. So I think winning that conference, in the case of North Texas, they only have 1 loss, would be more impressive to me than James Madison winning the Sun Belt with 1 loss, which is why I've got North Texas as my group of 5 representative. Another thing to consider is who these teams lost to. North Texas loss was to South Florida, which is a pretty good team. James Madison lost to Louisville. So make of that what you will. Those are the losses for North Texas and James Madison. But it did come down to North Texas and James Madison for me, and I went with North Texas at 11. And that leaves room for 1 more conference champion. Now, it's possible James Madison ends the season ranked higher than the ACC champion. And if that happens, you'll have 2 group of 5 teams in the playoff and no ACC team. They have to take 5 conference champions. The most likely scenario right now in the ACC is that the conference championship game there will be Virginia versus SMU, and I would take SMU in that game. And so I've got them there at the 12 seed, but it's possible specifically, it's possible James Madison finishes ranked higher than the ACC. I'm going to have to see it to believe it, but it is possible. But in my scenario, I've got the ACC getting in. James Madison would be sort of the next possible conference champion to take. If it wasn't the ACC, it would be James Madison. So that's how my playoff bracket came out this week. It'll change again next week when I do it. Obviously, after the last week of the regular season, rivalry weekend, a lot of these teams have big games. Texas A&M and Texas, Georgia and Georgia Tech, Oregon and Washington, Alabama and Auburn, Ohio State and Michigan. So still plenty of opportunity for turmoil, for upsets, for chaos here, and not just mine, but in everybody's college football playoff bracket. But as the way things stand right now, and predicting the games for this week, this is how I've got it. I've got it shaping up. Now, the teams that aren't in that probably a lot of people are wondering about. We'll start with the Notre Dame Miami problem. Now, Miami could do the committee a lot of favors this weekend by losing on the road at Pitt, and that is a possibility. Miami is not a dominant team. I think they're the most talented team in the ACC. I think when they play up to their potential in the ACC, they're the best team in the ACC. Unfortunately, there's just too many times this year where they haven't done that, specifically in a home loss to Louisville. They did also lose on the road to SMU, but that's a road game. It's the home loss to Louisville that ultimately is keeping Miami out of the ACC championship game. I understand all the arguments for putting Notre Dame ahead of Miami. I know they're looking at things like strength of record, strength of schedule, game control matrix, margin of victory, best wins, who'd you lose to. I understand that's what the committee is looking at. And so it makes sense, I guess, for the committee to have Notre Dame ranked where they do. My issue with that is that all of those things, game control matrix, strength of schedule, how much did you win by, who'd you lose to, all of those things, to me, are better suited to compare teams that haven't played each other. Notre Dame and Miami played. Yeah, it was in week 1. Is a week 8 game more important than week 1? I don't think it is. The regular season is short. It's 12 games. I can't put a team in the playoffs, Notre Dame, over a team they lost to that has the same record. I can't do that. The committee can. They've shown us that for 2 weeks now, 3 weeks. They can do that. I can't do that. Now, again, Miami can do a lot of people a lot of favors by just losing on the road at Pitt. And if that happens, that would be a third loss for Miami. And then while the head-to-head against Notre Dame would still matter, because they had more losses, you could easily then move Notre Dame ahead of Miami. But as long as they have the same record and they played and Miami beat them, I cannot put Notre Dame over Miami. And I don't have Miami in my playoff, so therefore I don't have Notre Dame in my playoff, because wherever I would have Miami, Notre Dame would be then a spot behind that, which would be somewhere in the 10, 11, 12 range if I was doing a straight ranking. But you got to remember, when it comes to seeding the playoffs, you have to make room for the 5 conference champions, including a group of 5 team in the ACC. So if that were not a requirement, then this would be a lot easier. You would bump out SMU. You would bump out North Texas. I would have Miami at 11 and in the playoff, and I'd have Notre Dame at 12 and in the playoff. But I can't do that because the rules of the playoff state you have to have 5 conference champions. So I have to bump Notre Dame and Miami out to make room for 2 conference champions, in this case, North Texas and SMU. Beyond that, you've got Vanderbilt. I don't have an argument as to why Vanderbilt doesn't deserve to be in the 12-team playoff. Both of their losses are against good teams. They lost to Texas and Alabama. Alabama's in the playoffs. Texas is a top 20 team. They lost on the road. They've got some good wins. There's nothing I can point to about Vandy to go, that's why I don't have them in. Unfortunately, there are more 2-loss teams than there are playoff spots. The same thing with Notre Dame, by the way. You can make a case that Notre Dame is playing like a top 5 team in the country right now. Now, here's the thing with that. That's purely opinion, 100% opinion. And while you have to include opinion in any ranking or playoff seeding that you do, imperial data, objective facts should outweigh that, and the reality is Miami's got a couple of bad losses and Notre Dame lost to Miami, and they have the same record. So I explained that already. With Vandy, it's not they lost to this team and they shouldn't have, or they don't have any quality wins, or they're in a bad league. It's none of that. It's just, who do you take out? You got to remember, you can't take out SMU or North Texas. You could take out BYU, would be the next team you would consider taking out to put, say, a Vandy in, or Miami or Notre Dame for that matter. And the committee may do that. I can't punish BYU out of the playoffs, like I said, for losing their conference championship game, while Vandy, Miami, Notre Dame are all sitting around not good enough to play in a conference championship game. I can't punish BYU to that extent. And they would only have 1 regular season loss, so they would have a better record than those 3 teams in the regular season. BYU would. Better than Notre Dame, better than Miami, better than Vandy at 11-1. Their second loss would come in a 13th game that those 3 teams didn't participate in. So that's the reasoning there. So it's just a matter of, okay, Vandy deserves to be in the playoffs. It's sort of the same thing when, like, in week 4 or 5 of the season, you put out a top 25, right? And somebody goes, well, you should have such and such ranked. Okay. Who you taking out? You should have Washington ranked. Okay. Well, if I put Washington in, who do I take out? If I put Washington in and take out Iowa, then I got people saying Iowa should be ranked. Okay. Well, every time you put somebody in, you got to take somebody out. BYU's the obvious one, but again, I gave you my reason and explanation there as to why I can't take BYU out if their second loss comes in the conference championship game. So it becomes a scenario where there's just not room for Vandy, Miami, or Notre Dame. It's not that any of those teams have done anything where I go, oh, well, they don't deserve to be in the playoffs because of this, this, and this. It's just, you can only put 12 teams in there. And if I put anybody in here that's not in there now, that means I got to take somebody out. And I don't have room for that. So that's my explanation there. That's my bracket. Let me know what you think about it down below. We'll watch the rankings reveal tonight for the college football playoff committee deal on ESPN, and then call-in show for me tonight at 9 o'clock. So feel free to call in tonight at 9. We can talk about this bracket here. We can talk about the official playoff bracket that comes out tonight. But again, just like with my top 25 rankings, I don't expect everybody watching this video to agree with the bracket that I've got here. But I do spend an inordinate amount of time, in this case about 20 or 25 minutes, explaining it. So at least you know where my mindset is and sort of what my thinking process is on ranking and seeding these teams. And again, I don't expect everybody to agree with it, but this is how it comes down for me. Appreciate you watching. Make sure you hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if for some reason you're not, and have a good morning.